Okay, welcome back everybody. All right, so now we are leaving the haven of stocks, and we're moving in to that other way large corporations or certainly the government will use to finance some major transactions, the bond market, okay? Now again, unlike stocks, a bond, basically, remember, is an IOU. It's a debt. It's not an equity instrument. It is a debt instrument, okay? And what is happening with a bond, you know, it sounds great. You know, a bond sounds, very, very secure, but it is a debt, okay? So we always have to remember that. Number one, it's a debt, okay? Now, could be issued by corporations, could be issued, I think in your textbook, one person was issuing it to another individual, but typically when we think of bonds, we think of some, government bonds, and we think of large corporate bonds, okay? All right, again, this is another major way of direct borrowing, okay? But remember, the stock market, that company, you buy stock, you spend $10,000 on the stock, when the stock goes down to 5 or 1,000, or look at Lehman Brothers, that big investment bank. Back in the movie Too Big to Fail, was the fourth largest investment bank in the country. At one time, their stock was, and I don't know how many, right off the top of my head, outstanding shares they had, but they were selling, the shares were $66 a share. And it went down, well, the short sellers were putting pressure on it to go down too, but it went down because people were losing their confidence in the bank, and they did make some toxic loans. It went down to the single digits before it finally declared bankruptcy. But the thing of it is, even if they flat out declare bankruptcy, or let's say they don't. Let's say you bought it at $66 and it's down to $1 a share. They don't have to pay you back $65 because that is the nature of owning equity in a company. Stocks, bonds on the other hand, that is direct borrowing, and somebody owes you money, whether it's a corporation that you bought the bond from, or from the United States government, okay? Now, government bonds typically paid a little bit better than they do now. I remember, well, back when I was your age, they made perfect gifts, because a government bond, you could go out and get a 25, or my favorite for my graduation presents for my nieces and nephews was a $50 United States savings bond. Now, that was a bond that did not have any coupons, and the ones in your textbook talked about, for the most part, don't have coupons, but and we are going to talk about ones that do. Some bonds have coupons, meaning they'll pay you so much of the interest, twice a year, so on and so forth. But a government savings bond, for instance, when I was your age, you could go to any bank and you would walk in and say, I want let's say a $50 United States savings bond. And they would give you almost like a parchment type paper. It was beautiful. It said $50 on it, United States. It was really impressive. And it said $50 all over it, okay? Now on the back it had all the details of, you have to hold it for, I believe the ballpark was around 6 years. You had to hold it for 6 years. And then after the 6th year, then you could cash it in to the bank for $50. And when I went and bought the U.S. savings bond, it didn't cost me $50. It was like, for instance, $35, all right? So it was a great graduation present for my nieces or nephews because it looked like you were giving them $50, but you actually only spent $35, okay? They're not as prevalent or easily to, you can still get them, but I don't believe you can go to just any bank and they have the beautiful ones that we used to buy. But anyway, they're still around. They're government bonds. You have to hold them for a certain amount of time, and they can change in terms of maturity date. I mean, not after you purchase it, but there are different bonds with different maturity dates, and that's one thing we're going to talk about. We have to be careful about. Okay. Anyway, they did make wonderful gifts, and they were yes, you can still get U.S. bonds, of course, but they certainly were well, they were a lot fancier in the good old days. They just looked like, wow, this looks like something. All right, but again, you can still buy them. In fact, people buy them all the time, but it's a little different. Well, let's take a look at the four parts of a bond, this IOU, all right? Now, the bond is an IOU. That is the first thing we have to remember about a bond. But let's break it apart and take a look at the four most important parts of it. Well, number one, the name of the borrower. Now, is the name of the borrower important? I always ask my in-class classes this, and sometimes I'll get different answers, but yeah, it's hugely important. I mean, because the name of the borrower, I mean, if you're going to buy $10,000 worth of Argentinian bonds or U.S. savings bonds or Greek bonds, there is a big difference in the name of the borrower, because you would probably sleep a lot better holding United States savings bonds than you would if you had $10,000 from Venezuela, all right? So you have to check who the borrower is. Now, Argentina has had a history of defaulting, meaning they can't make the payment on their bonds, all right? And that is the big D word. Let's see, do I have it in here yet? Well, we're going to be talking about that in a little bit, but yes, that is one thing you want to definitely avoid, the D word, the default word, okay? So the name of the borrower is very important, okay? Just same thing with you bought bonds from a company. Are you going to buy bonds from a company that's been in business 100 years, has a strong track record, so on and so forth? Or are you more inclined to take a risk? Now, if you are inclined to take a risk on a relatively new company, it's been in business maybe 2 years or so, all right, but go in with your eyes open and say, okay, this company, there is a 30% or 40% chance of it failing, so I may not get all or a big portion of my money back, okay? So the name of the borrower is very important, okay? Now, the number 2 is the repayment date. It's also called the maturity date. I always ask my 9 children when their maturity date was, and I never could get an exact answer. But in bonds, it means the date that the bond is called in and it will pay the face value, okay? So in the repayment date or the maturity date, when the bond matures, here's where you have to ask yourself, am I comfortable buying this bond and putting, because some bonds are not super short-term bonds, as many government securities are. They are short-term bonds. There are some very long-term bonds. I mean, Greece, they were offering years ago. I had one student almost bought some Greek bonds. They were paying 10%, and they were 10-year bonds. But, 10% sounds like a great return, and this is no disparagement towards Greece, but the Greek economy had an awful lot of trouble. And there was a very, very, very good chance that, your money is tied up for 10 years, an event, as they say in some economic books, an event could happen, all right? Normally when they say an event could happen, it's typically not good news. It's not that Greece is calling you up saying, wow, the economy is doing just so well, we're going to give you a bonus on that bond. No, typically an event means something catastrophic has happened, so on and so forth. Long and the short of it is, gee, we're sorry, we can only pay you back 70, we can't pay you back any of the interest. And again, this goes to a default could be anywhere from we just can't pay you the interest, which is coming due tomorrow, so we want a moratorium on the interest, to, boy, we can't pay you the interest and, we're going to give you your bond back and we can only give you 75 cents on the dollar. All the way to they can give you practically nothing on it. Okay, that would be an extreme default. Okay? But anyway, repayment date, the maturity date. You have to ask yourself, how comfortable are you with your money being tied up for, let's say 3 years or 5 years, or it could be a 1-year bond. Now, again, 1 year, that's not too bad, all right? But you do need to ask yourself that. After you've determined the name of the borrower is a reputable firm or a stable country, okay? Now, the face value, it's also called the par value, all right? And basically that just tells you what is due at maturity. So for instance, when I bought those $50 U.S. savings bonds for my nieces and nephews, that's what it said on the face. It said $50 all over the front. That's what was going to be paid at maturity. Of course, it was on the back where it said, you have to hold the bond for, let's say 6 years or so. But the maturity, the face value or the par value is what is it the bond is paying at maturity, at the due date, okay? And then the last one, the thing you have to look at is the dollar price. Well, what did you pay for it, okay? Now, if it's not set in stone, if it's something that can be negotiated, well, let's say it's a bond that has $100 face value. Here I drew up one that's got a face value, just for simplicity's sake, of $110, all right? Well, is it important for you to know what you're paying? Well, absolutely, because if it doesn't have a coupon, meaning the interest payment that you clip, all right, what you paid for it and the face value, the differential, is where you're going to figure out the interest rate that you made, okay? So it's very important in terms of a zero coupon bond to try to figure out, well, how much am I making? And it's not real difficult. You just basically you take the face value. In this case, it's $110. Subtract the price you paid, and let's say you paid $100 over the initial price, which was $100. So you got 110 minus 100 over 100. That's 10, and we're considering this as a 1-year bond. That's 10%. So in doing this zero coupon bond, you're getting 10%, okay? Now, there are some bonds that do have coupons, and you bought them, and they're paying you 4, 5, 6%. Except in 1980, that's when the interest rates were going way, way, way up, somewhat like what's happening in Russia right now, where their interest rate went from 9.2 to 20%. They're experiencing quite a bit of a change over there. But in the 1980s, you could get, the interest rates were extremely high here. And I bought a bond that was over 13, was something like 13.5% interest. And I thought that was a wonderful bond, to have. So here's what you have to remember. The second, aside from these four, and the number one idea of a bond being an IOU, the second most important principle of a bond is the bond value and the prevailing interest rates, not the interest rate that the bond says it's going to pay you, okay? So let's say you have a bond, and let's say it has coupons, all right? And it says you are going to get, we'll use 3%, okay? All right, so that bond is paying you 3%. That's pretty well fixed, all right? What's not fixed, as we know in economics, is, well, prevailing interest rate. What the general interest rates out there, what are they doing? Are they going up? Are they going down? What are they doing? Well, here's what happens. When prevailing interest rates just start to go up, the value of your bond will go down, will tend to go down, okay? So there's an inverse relationship, somewhat like the law of demand. If the prevailing interest rate is going up, let's say your bond is paying you 3%, and prevailing interest rates go up, they go to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8%. Well, if the prevailing interest rates are out there at 8%, your 3% bond doesn't look all that good all of a sudden, okay? So, and here's the key though. If you had to sell it, then, you would have to sell it at a discount, okay? So that's where it would lose a little of its value because the prevailing interest rates have gone up. And if you had to sell it, then you would have to sell it at a discount. But, and here's the thing, that's why I told you, make sure you feel comfortable with, the number of years it's going out. But if it was, let's say it's a 2-year bond, all right? And, the interest rates are up there. And you're at, you're getting your 3%, but it's okay. You say, no, I figured I was happy with that 3%. I'm good. I can wait to the maturity date because that's not going to change. You're still going to get the face value at the maturity date. You're not going to have to discount. You only lose if you had to sell the bond. If something, and we know in life things come up. If something came up and you had to sell the bond before the maturity date and interest rates were way up here, well, then you would have to sell it at a discount. So, number one, a bond is an IOU, it's a debt, and there's an inverse relationship between prevailing interest rates and the value of your bond. And again, the interest rates could go down. Let's say it went down to 2 3/4, 2.5%. Well, now, if the interest rates are at 2.5 and your bond's paying 3, you're in a real good position because you can hold the bond to maturity, or if you have to sell it, guess what? You can sell it now at a premium because there's that inverse relationship, okay? So those are the two key things we want to remember about a bond, all right? Okay. And again, these are zero coupon bonds, all right? Okay, now there are bonds that have coupons, and typically look like this, and they are in the line of the government U.S. savings bonds, which really looked awfully nice. Typically, these corporate bonds also look very impressive, and a lot of scroll work. And then on the bottom, they have all these little coupons. And what happens is, and this is what my bond had, yeah, and it had a date on each bond, on each coupon, and an amount. And it just said, okay, I'm every 6 months, January 1st, July 1st, you could clip the coupon and bring it to the bank, and they would deposit it for you, okay? So that's where we got the term, actually we got the term coupon clippers, not so much from people who clip coupons from, the weekend paper or from different magazines, or they get it in the mail, they collect coupons. But the original term for coupon clippers dates quite a ways back, and it referred to older couples who typically invested in what would be considered a more conservative investment, such as bonds. And they would clip the coupons, from these bonds, okay? So that's where we got the term coupon clippers. Okay, now, just as we know, everybody has a credit rating, for gosh sakes. I mean, if you go to buy a car, they'll figure out what your credit score is, and that will have could have a major impact on how much you're going to spend every month. Because if you had a really high credit score, 700 or I don't know, 720, you may be maybe getting finance for a new car at around 4.25%. But if you're just starting out and you haven't established, and this happens a lot to especially college students who are just started, they haven't bought a lot of things on time. It has nothing to do with whether or not you're credit worthy. It's just that you don't have a track record of payments. Well, if you didn't have a track record of payments, they would give you a lower credit score. And if you had one, I don't know, let's say it was in the high 500s, you may end up not paying 4% for that car loan. You might end up paying, like 17%. The thing of it is, start making the car payments and then try to renegotiate the loan down the line after you've made maybe 6 months of on-time payments. But making timely car payments will definitely help your credit score, okay? And same thing with bonds. Bonds are rated not so much from 800 and something down to 400 or what 400 for you and I, but they're rated AAA all the way down to CC. Now, and you'll be surprised. I think you might be surprised if you look in your textbook. You'll see some big corporations that they're not all AAA. I mean, Harvard University, their endowment fund is AAA. Okay, but there's some very large, well-known corporations that maybe AA or A. I mean, still good, or even some that have slipped into the BBB rating, and you think to yourself, wow, these are pretty good companies. What happened? Well, a lot of things can happen. Typically, if the Moody's or one of the credit rating companies will look at the companies and they have all different criteria. Perhaps they missed their earnings mark a couple of times, something. And if they do lower, let's say they go from AA to A, still good. I mean, still you would be you'd be all right to invest in single A bonds. I might not go below single A. Again, I'm not offering you financial advice, just from what people have told me. These are usually called investment grade. When you get into the B, you get into the more speculative grade of bond, and double B and B is the junk bond, and then we get into the C's, the really junk bond, Turkey and Argentina. Okay, so the problem is a company will become very upset if their credit rating, I mean, if they're good, everything's fine, and they've been doing well, but maybe they missed a couple of key marks here and there, and they were bumped down from AAA to AA. Well, that bumping down from a AAA to AA is going to cost them quite a bit of money now for new bonds that they're going to have to pay. And again, it's just stands to reason. If the risk goes up, and we're still talking very, very safe, AA, but if the risk goes up even a bit, you know, the amount you have to pay, the interest is going to go up. So, in other words, if the rating, I should say, goes down, then the amount you have to pay will go up. And that's, you know, stands to reason. That's why Turkey was offering those 10%, they were offering 10% bonds, 10-year 10% bonds. Wow, if that was a solid investment, that wouldn't have been all bad during that time. 10% a bond for 10 years, that would have been fairly attractive. But again, I am not offering financial advice, but I did offer to my one student, don't buy them, and I'm glad he didn't. Okay, so again, this is where we're coming to the big D word, the default word. It means they're unable to pay back some or all of their obligations, okay? In the financial world, this is called getting a haircut. And I hope none of you ever, I have to get a haircut, but I mean, I have to get a physical one, but I hope none of you get a financial haircut, all right? Okay. Rule of thumb, the issuing company, if the default rate is higher, you know, meaning, you know, they're riskier, then they're going to have to pay a higher interest. And usually, the further out you go, normally, the further out you go, and it just kind of makes sense, generally the interest rate will be higher. Now, interest rates have been known to invert, but in general, rule of thumb, I mean, just think, you're looking at a 1-year bond or a 5-year bond, okay? Let's say relatively the same risk. Well, you know, I don't know about you, but if it was myself, I'd say, well, 1 year, okay, that's not too bad, but if I have to tie up my money for 5 years, I'm going to want a little bit more in terms of interest for it. And that's typically what happens. Now, again, this is economics. It is possible for them to invert, but just in general, a rule of thumb would be the further out, the higher the interest rate, which basically makes sense because they're tying your money up for that much longer, okay? All right, but the Fed can play with that, and they have, but that we'll get into that a little bit more when we start talking about monetary policy and the Federal Reserve. Okay, so let's get down to our last. All right. And this will wrap it up for today. And then there will be a review video for the second exam. Don't worry, you'll have plenty of time and plenty of heads up for it. I know we moved back a little bit on the syllabus. We spent a little bit more time on the early ideas, but everything's going to be on track, and we'll be fine. And there isn't anyone that's not doing at least fairly well in the class. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about T-bills. T-bills are government short-term bonds. Okay. And we want to spend a minute or two looking at these because these are really, really important. This is part of the biggest weapon the Fed has in its holster is the government T-bills or Treasury bills. Okay, what are they? Well, Treasury bills are really, really low risk, almost zero default. So they're extremely, extremely, extremely safe. All right, they are bonds. All right, but they're also short term and really, really low risk. Okay, but remember, if the risk went up, the rates would go up. But these are very, very, very low risk. So consequently, they're not paying. They're not paying very much at all. They're returning about 0.05% to 1.24%. Okay, and typically they're short. I'm talking less than a year, short term. All right, they're important because when we start talking about monetary policy, the biggest tool or weapon in the Fed that the Fed has, it's the buying and the selling of these Treasury bills, these T-bills, these short-term Treasury bonds, to the banking system that's pumping money in or taking money out of the economy, which is going to, we'll take a look at what effects that has, okay? Okay, securitization, interesting. That happened a lot, especially during the Great Recession. What they were doing, they were bundling, especially mortgage-backed securities, together. And they were, this goes to the point that, one bank would have your mortgage and they'd sell it to another bank and sell it to another bank. And it happened to my daughter and son-in-law here in St. Clair Shores. They were selling their house, but it was a bank in India that owned or held the mortgage. So there was only a certain hour in the day where they had to get together to resolve all the paperwork and so on and so forth. Well, carrying that a bit further, the banks started bundling a lot of these mortgage-backed securities. And what they did, and when they did that, they said, well, we've created a new security. And we're going to sell shares of this, maybe 1,000 different mortgages. And they bundled it together. We're going to call it East Detroit Equity Bond, or Equity, East Detroit Equity Investment. And we're going to cut off and sell shares of this. And they did. So that's what securitization is about. You bundle loans together, you sell off shares of it, and when you think about it, it's like credit on top of credit, okay? So this also happened and hurt when the housing bubble popped. We had a lot of this going on, because when you think about it, really, you're selling shares of a bundle of mortgages. So you're selling, you're effectively, you're establishing credit on top of credit, okay? So when that bubble popped, and we're gonna talk about that when we talk about the Great Recession and compare it to the Great Depression, it'll be very interesting for you, okay? Okay, I think we're about up for today. There will be a posting for the review for the second exam, all right? And next week early, that third discussion question will be popping up, and you'll all have plenty of time for the discussion question, and I'm looking for some nice, solid answers. I mean, these are worth a lot of points. So, again, 2 or 3 sentences may be correct, but they just don't develop the idea enough. So, do yourself a favor, take your time, and explore the different aspects of it, because like I said, they are worth a lot of points, okay? All right, so with that being said, I wish you a great weekend, and I'll see you in the next few days.